have two senators here in studio. So in this hour, on our Political Point segment, we digest everything that matters to you. This morning, NASA leaders are set to hold peaceful protests to mount pressure on top IEBC officials to resign. Still this morning, a Jubilee parliamentary group meeting has been convened to draw a plan on how to shake up the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission as well as the Supreme Court. At the same time, the Wafula Chebukati-led commission has promised to be more transparent and accountable in its conduct of the upcoming repeat presidential poll. We have these and much more in our discussion in the next hour. In studio, I have Homa Bay Senator Moses Kajwang and Murang'a Senator Irungu Kangata. Many thanks for joining us in studio, gentlemen. So, of course, like I mentioned, a raft of issues surrounding the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission coming out to play this morning. And we did ask our viewers this morning whether the targeted individuals at the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission should bow to mounting NASA pressure and resign. Let me just take some of the comments, which will also form the basis of this conversation this morning. Remember, the hashtag is Morning Express KTN. Do give us your thoughts as we discuss the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission preparedness. Asiago Nemuel says it is common sense. Why hold on when your trustworthiness has been put to question? Mayora Gola here tells me Uhuru Park has already been cordoned off ahead of the NASA demo in the CBD. John Mutiso said that the integrity of IBC is grossly compromised. Why is Jubilee Party as equal contestants to NASA in defense of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission? That says a lot. Robert Muga says subverting the will of the people is criminality. These people must step aside to prove their innocence in a court of law. And here says, my understanding is that the I in IEBC is meant to be independent. John Mutiso here also says a public institution proved by court as irregular and unconstitutional. Does it have any speck of integrity to repeat the same exercise? Do keep your thoughts and comments coming in. Should the individuals bow to pressure and resign? We'll also be opening our phone lines. Our numbers will be on the screen in just a moment. You're welcome to call in and ask any questions or comments to our panelists this morning. So let me introduce them once again. Moses Kajwang, a Homa Bay Senator, as well as Honorable Irungu Kangata, who is the Murang'a Senator. Gentlemen, welcome once again.
Thank you.
Let me begin with you, Honorable Kajwang. NASA insists they will continue with their peaceful demonstrations against officials of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission for allegedly bungling the August 8th elections. But NASA has been accused of using illegal means to hound out these IEBC officials from office because, according to Kenyan law, one is innocent until proven guilty. Investigations are still ongoing. What informs NASA's decision to go ahead of the investigations and call for mass action?
Thank you and good morning. We need a holistic reading of the Constitution. Article 37 guarantees the right to assemble, to petition, to picket and to demonstrate. And that is the specific article that NASA is relying on the activities of today. You know, you call it mass action. I don't think mass action is the right word because mass action connotes some militancy that sometimes in the past has destabilized peace. This is a peaceful demonstration. And NASA is not only talking about removal of certain persons. When we released what we call our irreducible minimums, it was not only on people. It also touched on process. It touched on systems. So we've got a three-tier kind of argument that there are people who squandered 40 billion Kenya shillings in the form of the last general election. If your employee was to squander 40 billion shillings in your corporation, definitely you'd want to have their head on a spike.
Right.
And it is not only the 40 billion shillings that was squandered on the election. On the day the Supreme Court annulled the results of the election, the Nairobi Stock Exchange lost 50 billion Kenya shillings in just about 10 minutes, and the losses continue. So the people who bear the greatest responsibility for this do not have the moral authority. We are not talking about the legalese of whether they've been found to be guilty or not. In fact, if you look at the Supreme Court ruling, it makes it very clear that there are people who conducted illegalities and irregularities. And therefore, the people who bear the greatest responsibility need not even wait for the DPP to take them to court. It needs to be some moral conscience that they exercise to get out. So that's on the people.
Right.
On systems and process, we also have a strong argument.
Before we get to the systems, is it NASA playing judge, jury, and executioner, considering they have made the demands for these officials to be to resign or be hounded out of office, but investigations are still continuing, which are not yet conclusive? Detectives say they will need 2 more weeks to give their conclusive findings to the Director of Public Prosecutions, who will then, after that, take action against the concerned individuals.
The Supreme Court played the judge. It is not NASA playing the judge. We took our case to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court looked at the evidence, and they made a ruling that there were individuals in IEBC that did those things. They were not done by ghosts, or they were not done by Martians. The errors of commission and omission, the illegalities and irregularities were done by human beings and individuals. We saw the chairman of the commission write a letter to the secretary of the commission seeking an explanation on certain aspects of the electoral process that went wrong. We cannot hide our heads in the sand and think that these irregularities and illegalities were committed by Martians. But I have a problem when we only focus on people, and we do not want to look at processes and systems. And that is why I need to make this correction, that we are not only demonstrating today for the removal of people, but we are also demonstrating for the reform of processes and systems. Now, we saw the IBC come up and respond to some of the issues that we had raised. The response came when we had already made our plans and we had already notified the police about our intentions. That will not stop us from continuing with our demonstration, but we can have demos, and at the same time we can continue to have discussions. All we are looking for is an election that will meet the threshold set out in the Constitution, set out in the various laws, and the Supreme Court judges said they will not hesitate to nullify an election conducted in violation of the Constitution and the Elections Act. We cannot afford to lose another 10 billion. I've already illustrated that we lost 40 billion in the first election, 50 billion in one day when the results were annulled. We are still planning for another 10 billion. We must be people who are outraged when individuals are given responsibilities and they do not deliver as per expectations.
And we'll come back to those systems in a bit more detail. Honorable Kangata, your thoughts on NASA's call? And he says not mass action, but peaceful demonstrations against several IBC officials and systems within the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission.
Yes, it is true. The Constitution is clear. It gives them the right to demonstrate and also picket. The only problem is that we know those demonstrations usually crystallize into violent clashes because their supporters are not controllable. So it's just another decoy for them to go and loot people's property and also destroy other people's property. Number two, in regard to his argument that the Supreme Court gave them maybe a license for them to proceed and try to eject some people out of the IBC, it is not true. Everyone read that judgment. It was made in broad daylight. There were several paragraphs on that issue, and the Supreme Court was very clear. It said that the problems that may have occurred in that election could not be attributable to anyone in the IBC. In fact, it was a clear exoneration of any IBC official. And if at all there will be any action that may be taken against IBC official, that action will not be criminal. To the best of my knowledge, it will only be administrative and it will be internal. And by the way, to the best of my knowledge, it appears there has been an attempt by the IBC to correct any problem that may have occurred as a result of mishandling by various officials. We are aware of some effort to create a certain team called special team to manage the elections. They are not giving that team appropriate time for them to proceed and conduct the election. We are also aware that some of the officials, these people are demanding to leave the IBC. Some of them have left, not as a result of their pressure, but as a result of reaching mandatory retirement age. So the point is, they just want to be cantankerous. They are not being fair to IBC or even to the nation. Otherwise, if at all, they were looking at the issue of a new team to conduct the elections, of course, that is already in place. We have a new project team, which is quite distinct from the one they are raising issue about. If at all they wanted a repeat election, they got what they wanted in the Supreme Court. So, but now they seem to want their cake and eat it, right, each and every demand.
I'd like to put you on the spot for a moment, Honorable Kangata, because one of our viewers here, John Mutiso, had an interesting question. The integrity of the IBC is grossly compromised. Why is the Jubilee Party as equal contestants to NASA in defense of the independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission? Now, what you've said, notwithstanding, you've said, even if there was any action to be taken against any of the IBC officials, it would not be a criminal action. This despite the fact that the court did not only find irregularities, but also illegalities, which would therefore translate into criminal action being taken. But this morning, President Uhuru Kenyatta has convened a parliamentary group meeting for the Jubilee Party. And part of the proposals, this is on the front page of the Standard newspaper this morning, part of the proposals there is that decisions made within the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission be made with a 2/3 or by a 2/3 majority. And in that proposal, some of the issues being cited, just like you've mentioned, that the IBC chairperson, Afula Chebukati, seems to be making unilateral decisions. Part of them is that project team that he had put together to oversee the or the repeat election, rather, as well as his unsuccessful attempt to suspend IBC CEO Ezra Chiloba. And so we're also seeing Jubilee seemingly having a problem with the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, aren't we?
Yes, we do have issues that we have raised, in particular regarding the conduct of the chairman of the IBC. But now, can you compare ourselves and also the NASA reaction? Yes, they have a problem with the IBC. We have a problem with the IBC, but them, they are calling for mass action. They are calling for demonstration, which are going to cause instability. But on ourselves, yes, we are raising issue, but we are not doing demonstrations. We are not causing tension to be created in this country. So that tells you the civility between the differences in civility between these two political formations. When you saw the Nairobi Stock Exchange losing billions of money after the election was cancelled, that in fact is a vindication of the good work that we have done as a government. The investors were fearful that these guys may usurp power. And if they usurp power, what happens? So otherwise, if they were not fearful, they ought to have remained in Kenya. But that flight of capital is evidence enough that the investors had a lot of trust and confidence in the way Jubilee had won that election, and they were happy with the maintenance of political status quo, right, which had now been upset by that cancellation of that election, which was instigated by the NASA team. So, and also probably to reply to that question that has been raised by Mr. Mutiso, from where we sit, we don't really mind any action per se being taken against any IBC official. The only problem that we have is that we can see the end game plan of NASA. They do not want a repeat election. If we are very certain that is their end game plan. Otherwise, why is it that every time they demand this, then once they get it, they move it to the next level? Right, in fact, there is a musician who sang and said, you give them a yard, they start asking for a mile. You give them a mile,
but let me give
they start
Honorable
asking
Kajwang a response to Honorable Kangata.
Irungu surely knows Bob Marley, that the one he attributes the phrase to. We saw last week Jubilee supporters go to the Supreme Court and do things that NASA has not done in its picketing and demonstrations. I was part of the demonstrations last year where we were seeking reforms. We didn't do half of the things that we saw Jubilee supporters do last week. This concept of civility, I think it is an insult to the nation, because we saw Jubilee supporters shake the gates of the Supreme Court of all the places, which is supposed to be, it is equivalent of me leading a band of people to go shake the gates of State House or to go shake the gates of Parliament, because these are the three arms of government. We did not see police come out with tear gas and water cannons and horses and the kind of force and violence that they visit when the opposition goes out. We saw the Chief Chief Justice himself complain that their lives and the institution of the judiciary was under siege, and the police commissioner had refused to respond. You know, when we sit here on television, we are talking to a population that is very informed. We are talking to a population that is capable of making decisions on the basis of the observations that they make. I think Irungu and the Jubilee team, we owe this nation some kind of respect. We cannot say that when the government decides to ban and riot and the things that we saw yesterday in Kiambu, that becomes normal. And then when NASA exercises its constitutional right to demonstrate, already you are predicting violence. You know, Irungu, you and I were in university politics, and remember we used to say we are always peaceful until the police decides to riot. And that's a situation that the Jubilee government wants to put any other person who is not in agreement with them. The issue of erosion of value at the Nairobi Stock Exchange. Risk is about certainty and uncertainty. It is not about Uhuru Kenyatta or Raila Odinga. So we cannot make a conclusion that investors were disappointed that Uhuru was not president, and that's why there was capital flight. It was not even capital flight. It was erosion of value as a result of the uncertainty that visited the political environment. And as we politic, we must remember that there are 40 million Kenyans out there trying to make a living. So many things are going on. So many things are slipping under the fingers. We are losing Chan. Nurses are still on strike. Clinical officers are on strike. We've got a crisis in this country. We need to ensure that whatever decisions we take are decisions that can push this country forward. The demonstrations that we are holding today, I hope they're going to be a wake-up call. The intransigence and the hard positions that we are seeing from Jubilee, and particularly by the president, who is supposed to be the head of state and unifying factor in this country, is extremely unfortunate. And I can tell you there's a country called Ivory Coast, which was a bastion of peace, which was a bastion of prosperity, the leading producer of cocoa in the world, a country that was established on foundations that were much greater than Kenya. Ivory Coast had a civil war. Why? Because of election disputes. Let's not take these things lightly. We might not have a country next year. Somalia went that way. Ivory Coast went that way. Uganda went that way as a result of elections. Elections, disputes in electoral systems lead to civil strife. And we are playing around. If you are not careful, Kenya might not be what it is next year.
Let's just hold it there because I want to take a short commercial break. But when we come back, we'll be focusing a little more on NASA's claims. They claim that the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission has failed to inadequately address the electoral reform proposals they have outlined in the irreducible minimums. We'll be taking a look at that and comparing it to what the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission says it has already done in preparation for the election. Do stay with us.